Hello and welcome to the Russian Empire History Podcast, the history of all the peoples of the Russian Empire. I'm your host, JP Bristow. This is Season 1, The Forest, the Steppe and the Birth of the Russian Empire, and Episode 58, The Downward Spiral. Just a PSA for patrons to start with. Apple will start charging App Store fees on purchases made through the Patreon app very soon, which will mean a 30% surcharge on your subscription. You can avoid this by subscribing through the Patreon website at patreon.com/The Russian Empire History Podcast. And a big thank you once again to all subscribers, whichever method you use. This does not affect any of the other ways of subscribing. We left off last episode with the death of Svyatoslav. His final act was to summon Ryurik, his designated successor, who would now no longer need to share power. You might think that their agreement to share power and secure the succession would help to ensure a stable transfer of power, but no. There will be no more stability in Rus. The knyazes are becoming entirely fixated on internal squabbles for power. The chronicle does say that the people of Kyiv were happy to welcome Ryurik. He had already ruled the city, he had a solid claim, and he was the descendant of their favorite clan, the sons of Mstislav. Therefore he arrived and sat on the throne of his father and grandfather. The Laurentian Chronicle, the text compiled in Suzdalia, tries to claim that Vsevolod Bolshoi Gnezdo, acting as the eldest knyaz of the Monomachs, sent his representatives to install Ryurik, but this certainly didn't happen. It was not possible for Vsevolod to receive word of Svyatoslav's death and send his people to Kyiv in time. At most, they would have turned up later to declare Vsevolod's approval. The episode is, however, an indicator of Vsevolod's intention to interfere in Kievan affairs now that the balance of power has been rearranged. As the ruler of Kyiv and head of the Olgovichi, Svyatoslav had been able to play Suzdalia off against the Rostislavichi. Now, Ryurik held greater authority as the knyaz of a Kyiv undivided from its lands, and a simple opposition appeared between the Rostislavichi and Suzdalia. But let's step back for a minute. This was not Vsevolod's first attempt to impose his influence on southern Rus. Last episode, we skipped over events in Halych following the death of Yaroslav Osmomysl, so let's catch up on that now. Yaroslav had died in 1187 and appointed his younger son, Oleg, born to a concubine named Anastasia, as his successor. This was obviously a break with the traditional line of succession and therefore bound to cause trouble. His eldest son, Vladimir, from his wife Olga, the sister of Vsevolod Big Nest, was given the town of Peremyshl. The people of Halych soon expelled Oleg, who fled to shelter with Ryurik, and Vladimir took over Halych as well. Besides not being appointed the designated heir, Vladimir Yaroslavich was also allegedly a person of poor character, although we always have to be careful taking the chronicler's claims about people they dislike at face value. After his wife, Svyatoslav's daughter Boleslava, had died, he had two sons with a priest's wife. This made him vulnerable to challenges from other would-be knyazes. So Roman Mstislavich, Knyaz of Vladimir in Volhynia, basing his claim on the extremely flimsy grounds that his daughter Fyodora was married to Vladimir's son Vasilko, decided that he would take Halych. According to one chronicler, the townspeople supported Roman, but were unable to kill or expel Vladimir. In the end, they persuaded him to leave by threatening to kill his wife, and Vladimir took refuge with King Bela III of Hungary. According to another chronicle, Oleg, who had fled to Ryurik when Vladimir overthrew him, found Ryurik unwilling to support his claim, so instead he looked to King Kazimierz of the Poles for assistance. Just to note that when we're talking about different chronicles here, it means the chronicles kept in different knyazhestvas. There had long been Novgorod and Kyiv chronicles. By now, Susdalia and Halych had their own. Other cities had chronicles that have only survived as fragments or references in other texts. So, in this version, it was Oleg and his Polish allies that threw Vladimir out of Halych, and he also flees to Hungary. Kazimierz then installed Oleg as the Knyaz of Halych. In this chronicle, the townspeople also support Roman, and they poison Oleg so that Roman can take over. But Roman's position is far from secure. Bela is very happy to bring Halych under Hungarian influence by supporting Vladimir, and together they soon drive Roman out. He tries to go back to Vladimir in Volhynia, but his brother, who had taken over when Roman left, refuses to give the city back. Roman runs to the Poles for support, but they're not interested, and he's left to go cap in hand to his father-in-law, Ryurik. This is where the disagreement between Ryurik and Svyatoslav that we mentioned in the last episode takes place. Bela asks Svyatoslav to send his son Gleb to rule in Halych. The chronicle says that this is the fulfillment of some oath, but as usual it does not tell us what the oath was or when it was made. Whatever the circumstances, Svyatoslav sends Gleb as requested, without consulting Ryurik. Ryurik is enraged by this because, as you'll recall, part of their power-sharing agreement was that they would not enter into separate political agreements without each other. As Svyatoslav appears to be breaking the agreement, Ryurik thinks that Svyatoslav is plotting against him. According to the chronicler, Svyatoslav manages to appease Ryurik by reassuring him that he had sent Gleb on a private mission. If you guessed that the chronicle does not tell us what the mission is, you'd be right. Some scholars believe that the mission may have been negotiating a marriage between Gleb's daughter and a Byzantine prince. As Gleb was married to Rurik's daughter, this would indeed have settled him down. With this done, Svyatoslav suggests that the two of them remove Vladimir from Halych. It soon becomes clear what his ulterior motive is here. As we have noted, Rurik's control of the Kyiv lands severely reduces the wealth and authority of Svyatoslav as the Knyaz of Kyiv. So Svyatoslav comes up with the idea of offering Ryurik Halych in exchange for the Kyiv lands. Unfortunately, Ryurik does not take this bait, and they abandon their plans. Meanwhile, Bela proves a fickle ally to Vladimir. After using him to secure the city, he sends him back to Hungary, essentially as his captive, and places his son Andrew in Halych instead. A foreigner at the head of one of the knyazhestvos is a provocation for the Rus. Roman, still without a domain and still coveting Halych, now finds Ryurik quite ready to provide him with troops and attacks Andrew. However, Andrew drives him off. Then the people of Halych rebel. They ask Rostislav, son of Ivan Berlatnik, remember him from a few episodes back, to rule over them. But Andrew successfully defends the city against him too, killing Rostislav in the process. In 1189, Vladimir manages to escape from Hungary and arrives at the court of Kazimierz II in Poland. This time, Kazimierz is more interested in helping and makes his troops available. With his new Polish allies, Vladimir succeeds in expelling Andrew, and to secure his position, he asks his uncle, Vsevolod Big Nest, to support him as knyaz in exchange for his oath as a vassal. Vsevolod agrees and issues a notice prohibiting any knyaz from challenging Vladimir's right to rule in Halych. This is really aimed at his two rival-allies. It would be difficult for Vsevolod to directly intervene in Halych, as he would have to cross the whole of Rus to do so. The aim here is to extend his influence over the other knyazes and to reinforce his claim to be the senior knyaz of the Monomashichi. Just to remind you again, he was actually the genealogically senior knyaz. As the grandson of Vladimir Monomach, he had precedence over Ryurik, who was a great-grandson. Vsevolod's ambitions to be recognized as the senior knyaz were much weaker in relation to Svyatoslav, who was not a monomach and was himself the senior knyaz of the Olgovichi. At first glance, the knyaz of Kyiv was also politically senior to the knyaz of Vladimir and Suzdal, but we can understand that Vsevolod was looking at the example of his brother Bogolyubsky and thinking about how he could make himself the dominant knyaz, the power behind the throne, the kingmaker. In any case, to return to our story, Svyatoslav is now dead, and Ryurik rules in Kyiv. At first glance, the relationship between Vsevolod and Ryurik is rather clearer. Ryurik appears to have taken the throne without needing to rely on Vsevolod, but now we are going to see them testing each other. In 1195, Vsevolod married his eldest son, Konstantin, to the daughter of Mstislav Romanovich of Smolensk. It looks like he was trying to boost his personal ties to the rest of Rostislavichi in preparation for challenging Ryurik. The grounds for the dispute arose from the already contentious issue of the allocation of the Kyiv lands. When he took the throne, Ryurik invited his brother David to Kyiv, and the pair of them decided who would get what. Rurik's son, Rostislav, got Belgorod, David kept Vyshgorod, Roman Mstislavich, would-be of Halych, received 5 smaller towns, and all the Olgovichi were removed from the Kyiv lands. Unexpectedly or not for Ryurik, Vsevolod objected. Ryurik and the Rostislavichi, as well as their Izyaslavichi allies in Volhynia, had acknowledged him as the senior knyaz of the Rostislavichi, he reminded them, probably back in 1189, although the chronicler does not make it clear. Despite this, Ryurik had not given him towns or consulted him about the allocations. Vsevolod therefore withdrew his support and told Ryurik he would have to defend Rus without him, What's more, he strongly objected to Roman receiving any towns at all and threatened to attack him. Ryurik accepted the complaint. Roman agreed to return the towns to Ryurik for other compensation or other allocations, and Ryurik gave the towns to Vsevolod. Vsevolod did not push things too far. He installed Rurik's son, Rostislav, who was also his son-in-law, in Torchesk, and put his posadniki in the other towns. Vsevolod based his complaint on his seniority among the monarchs. He had not challenged Rurik's right to dispose of the towns as the knyaz of Kyiv. Rather, he had asserted his right as the senior knyaz to influence Rurik's decisions. So Rurik's plan to legitimize himself as the sole ruler through his co-rulership with Svyatoslav did not quite come to fruition. Even though there was no formal arrangement like there had been with Svyatoslav, he had now acknowledged that he was not strong enough to stand up to Vsevolod, and by giving him the towns, he had strengthened Vsevolod's position in the south. Vsevolod's maneuvers in the Kyiv lands were also intended to curb Roman, whose fortunes had recently improved. Roman's brother Vsevolod, the one who had seized Vladimir and Volhynia from him, had died in 1195. Vladimir reverted to Roman, and together with the Kyiv towns Ryurik had given him, that quickly took him from a knyaz of nothing who had failed to grab Halych to a new force in Western Rus, a force potentially capable of helping Ryurik resist Vsevolod's influence. Roman was quite understandably angry at Vsevolod for displacing him, especially after Vsevolod gave Torchesk to Rostislav, which the chronicler tells us had been Roman's plan for the town. Ryurik advised him to swallow his pride and maintain relations with Vsevolod as the senior knyaz, but Roman was not for conciliation. Instead, he went to Yaroslav Vsevolodovich of Chernihiv and persuaded him that it was actually his turn to rule in Kyiv. Ryurik learned of their conspiracy and appealed to Big Nest for support. Roman got cold feet and fled to Poland. He returned to Volhynia after being wounded in Poland, admitted his fault to Ryurik, and was forgiven. Ryurik even allocated him the town of Polony and some land in Porossia as compensation for his previous losses. Thus, with the dust of Rurik's ascent to the throne of Kyiv finally settled, we find ourselves with 5 rival knyazes. 4 of them are monomarchs. Vsevolod Big Nest, the genealogically senior knyaz and the most powerful individually, has the strongest claim to Kyiv, but like his brother, he prefers to remain in his own domain and assert his overlordship of the rest of Rus. Ryurik and his brother David of Smolensk, the senior knyazes of the Rostislavichi branch, are trying to assert their independent rule after playing second fiddle to Svyatoslav for years. Roman Mstislavich, now the senior knyaz of the Izyaslavichi of Volhynia, has a claim to Kyiv too, but is behind Vsevolod and the Rostislavichi. Too far down the line to make a credible bid independently, but significant enough for him to demand substantial payment for his allegiance. And lastly, there was Yaroslav Vsevolodovich of Chernihiv, His father had ruled in Kyiv, so he had a solid claim, but it would be difficult for him to make a challenge unless some of the monomachs came over to his side. I'm sure that all of you who have been listening to the events of the last century or so can plainly see that the system of succession created by Yaroslav the Wise is a constant source of instability and conflict. It's hard to imagine that this would not also have been plain to the people of the time too, but no knyaz was willing to give up his chance at succession to allow someone else to rule with greater stability. Yaroslav Vsevolodovich's failed attempt to displace Ryurik with Roman made him Rurik's first target when it came to consolidating his position in Kyiv. Together with David and Vsevolod Big Nest, he presented Yaroslav with a demand that the Olgovichi kiss the cross and swear never to seize their patrimonies, Kyiv or Smolensk, from them, their descendants, or any other monarch ever again. As the basis for their claim, they asserted that Yaroslav the Wise had given Svyatoslav, the founder of the Chernihiv branch of the family, land on the east bank of the Dnieper, and therefore the Olgovichi had no business claiming domains on the western side of the river. The major drawback to this argument, if Yaroslav Vsevolodovich spotted it, was that Yaroslav had also given Monomach's father, Vsevolod, lands on the eastern side of the river. According to the chronicler, they spent a long time arguing without reaching any conclusion. Clearly, Ryurik and David were aiming to secure Kyiv in the possession of the Rostislavichi, which was a violation of the Yaroslavian system of succession, which stipulated that Kyiv must always remain the common patrimony of the wider family, not any single branch. Of course, this was not the first such attempt. Vladimir Monomach had demoted the Svyatoslavichi of Chernihiv at Lubech, then designated his sons as successors. Then Mstislav somehow, we're not told how anywhere, seems to have persuaded Kyiv to accept his descendants, the Mstislavichi, as their preferred knyazes. However, those descendants were not as capable as their forefathers, and the succession reverted to the original system. Yaroslav was only willing to agree to one point, not to try to expel Ryurik from Kyiv. Easy enough, as he had little chance of doing so in any case. For the succession, he rejected Ryurik and David's demands entirely and told them that it would be up to God who ruled Kyiv after Ryurik. As they were all, he said, descendants of Yaroslav, they all had a claim. But Ryurik was not willing to settle on that outcome. As things stood, he had David and Big Nest with him. Roman had reconciled, and so Yaroslav stood alone. The balance of forces was definitely in favor of the Rostislavichi. It was also a chance to curry favor with Vsevolod. By asking him to lead the campaign against Yaroslav, Ryurik was once again acknowledging him as the senior knyaz of the Monomachs. So Vsevolod gathered his forces, calling in representation from all of what he termed Vladimir's tribe, that is, all the Monomach domains. Ryurik also summoned Kyiv's Polovtsi allies, and with the full strength of Rus arrayed against him, Yaroslav sent word to Vsevolod asking for peace terms. Ryurik negotiated terms with Yaroslav, agreeing that in exchange for Yaroslav giving up his ambitions for Kyiv, Ryurik would give him Vitebsk, a town the Rostislavichi held that was not part of the Smolensk patrimony or the Kyiv lands. Ryurik had the authority to dispose of the town, But a problem arose because David was the knyaz who actually held it, and he refused to give it up. Yaroslav took this as a violation of the agreement and declared war again. The army of Chernihiv, commanded by Yaroslav's nephew Oleg, marched on Vitebsk, where David's son-in-law was in charge, pillaging the Smolensk lands as they went. David sent his nephew, Mstislav Romanovich, and the Smolensk militia to defend the city. Oleg received support from the Polotsk militia and defeated the Smolensk troops. Captured Smolensk soldiers told Oleg that the people of Smolensk were unhappy with David, so he sent word to his uncle, summoning him to march on Smolensk. As Yaroslav gathered the Olgovichi militia to set out, he received a message from Ryurik telling him that if he planned to kill David, he was breaking the agreement they had kissed the cross on, and if he marched on Smolensk, Ryurik would march on Chernihiv, and then God would decide the outcome. The threat was enough to make Yaroslav halt, but it did not resolve the dispute. Yaroslav claimed that David had caused the conflict by refusing to hand over Vitebsk. Ryurik said that it was simply that his messengers had not reached David in time to inform him. More importantly, Ryurik said that attacking Smolensk was a breach of the oath Yaroslav had made not to challenge the Rostislavich's control of their patrimonial city. So no agreement was reached. Ryurik complained to Vsevolod that Yaroslav had been able to attack Vitebsk because Vsevolod did nothing to stop him, and therefore he should attack Chernihiv now. Vsevolod didn't want to do that, but he did agree that he would support Ryurik if Ryurik attacked Chernihiv. Ryurik did attack Chernihiv, but Vsevolod left him hanging. In late 1196, the balance of forces shifted again. Roman Mstislavich of Vladimir and Volhynia broke with Ryurik and reformed his alliance with Yaroslav. Using Polony, the town Ryurik had given him, as a base, he attacked the territory of David. After this, Big Nest finally joined in Rurik's attack on Chernihiv, and as he was already busy there, Ryurik ordered his nephew Mstislav and Vladimir Yaroslavich of Halych to attack Roman. So, Suzdaliya, Kyiv, Chernihiv, Smolensk, Volhynia, and Halych were all at war. Vsevolod, as ever, was looking out mainly for his own interests. Yaroslav wrote to him asking for reasonable peace terms. By reasonable, he meant that the Olgovichi would keep their right to contest the throne of Kyiv when the succession opened. Vsevolod was inclined to agree, although Ryurik and David remained dead set on eliminating the Olgovichi as rivals. Vsevolod promised to support them by attacking Chernihiv, but once again failed to turn up. Since Vsevolod did not wish to leave Suzdaliya to rule in Kyiv, Yaroslav was not his rival. The Olgovichi had done his lands no harm, His daughter, Vseslava, was married to Yaroslav's son, Rostislav. Yaroslav's brother, Svyatoslav, had been a friend and ally. So Vsevolod asserted his rights as the senior monarch to overrule the Rostislavichi and agreed a peace. He imposed a settlement that Yaroslav not seize Kyiv from Ryurik or Smolensk from David, as before, but he did not require Yaroslav to renounce any future claim. To appease Ryurik, Yaroslav was supposed to end his alliance with Roman, but he did not, and Vsevolod did not do anything about it. This alliance was in his interests anyway, as the combined threat of Yaroslav and Roman made Ryurik dependent on military aid from Susdalia. The chronicler makes it clear that Vsevolod is acting in his own interests with the other parts of the agreement. He asks for the release of Mstislav Romanovich, captured during the Vitebsk campaign. However, he is recorded in the chronicle as Vsevolod's son-in-law's father, rather than one of the Rostislavichi, to show that his value lies in his relationship to Vsevolod, not Ryurik. Then Vsevolod asked Yaroslav to expel Yaropolk Rostislavich. Remember him from last time, the guy who tried to rule Vladimir on the Klyazma during the last Susdalian succession? Yaroslav was not going to be allowed to support any challenges to Vsevolod's rule. At the same time as this agreement was being negotiated, Vsevolod, David, and Yaroslav also agreed separately that Novgorod would be free to choose their knyaz from any branch of the family, the Yureviches of Susdalia, the Izlaslavichi of Volhynia, the Rostislavichi of Smolensk, or the Olgovichi of Chernihiv. This agreement is a bit of a mystery. Given the context, the assumption is that it was made at Vsevolod's initiative, but given that Novgorod had already been doing this for a couple of generations, what difference did it make? The chronicler, as ever, does not explain, but we can simply take it as another instance of Vsevolod imposing his influence on other domains. The outcome of these agreements is that Vsevolod is, on the one hand, on good terms with Yaroslav for facilitating the peace, and with Roman for not forcing him to break up the alliance, and on the other hand, formally allied with Ryurik and David, who are unhappy about being forced to settle for less than they wanted. Vsevolod has therefore quite tidily put himself in a position to dictate which side is strongest in any dispute between them. Ryurik knew this, and he took it badly. In late autumn, Big Nest went home to Susdalia and wrote to Ryurik, telling him that the peace had been concluded. Ryurik angrily objected. He told Vsevolod that he had continually gone out of his way to accommodate him, and Vsevolod had let him down at every turn. He had made Roman his enemy because Vsevolod made him take his towns away and give them to him. He had attacked Chernihiv because Vsevolod said he would support him, and then Vsevolod did not turn up. When Vsevolod finally did get involved, he had negotiated a peace without consulting Ryurik that left Yaroslav and Roman as potential threat. Vsevolod was an oathbreaker, and therefore Ryurik was going to take those towns back and give them to the Rostislavichi. It has to be said that this was really a short-sighted move. Rurik's trouble had all started with offending Vsevolod by not giving him these towns. Taking them away was not going to go down any better, and he was not going to secure his throne against Roman and Yaroslav. Join me next episode to see how Rurik's attempt to resist the Big Nest's influence plays out. Thank you for listening, and until next time, goodbye.